There's lots of different ways to export your files from CAD. In this lesson, we're going to go over how to get those 3D step files. So let's get into it. In the last lesson, we detailed how to get those 2D vector files, or the DXFs, out of Fusion. Now we're going to talk about the 3D files. So if we come over here to the board, there's two big things that we need to remember from previous lessons. The first one is that step file equals 3D file. That's that solid body, and this is that universal file type that we're looking for. What we're going to see when we get in there is that mesh is going to show up, and mesh is going to be equal to that STL file. Now, if you're looking to 3D print, this is what you're looking for. But since in this one we're going to be focused on CNC parts and 3D bodies, we're going to be looking at step files only. Now, where we're going to find these is underneath the export option. We're going to be looking for that word in particular. The export is going to allow us to select step file, or the native file types, whether you're using SolidWorks or Fusion, are going to show up in this area here. Now, one big thing as well is that these are only going to show up at the component level. If we select a body, we're going to see the mesh show up, but not the step file show up. So now that we have a good understanding of that, let's jump onto CAD and get going. So now that we're in here, what we're going to see is that I created a two-body system, and it's all underneath one component. So I have one body here and then another body here. They are kind of meaningless, but what we can see is that they kind of interact with each other. They're right up against each other as a two-part system. Now, I put them underneath one component for a main reason here. And that's because if I right-click again on this body, we're going to see as Save as Mesh. I don't see an export option underneath here. If I come up to my main component up here, I can right-click on this, and I can see that Save as Mesh, so we can get the STL file of the whole entire setup, or I can click on Export. And that's the word that we're looking for in this lesson. Clicking on Export allows me to see a new dialog box pop up, and this right here is going to have a file type defaulted to Fusion, so we're going to see that F3D. If I drop down this menu, we can see a lot of different options that we saw in previous lessons, including that step file that we're looking for. Clicking on step file, I can put in a generic name. We'll call this edu1, and we can go ahead and click export. Now that I have that 3D file, I can go ahead and pull that directly into SendCutSend. By just dragging and dropping that step file, what we end up seeing that pops up is both pieces coming through at the same time. However, both pieces are now connected to each other. They're one body, and this is something that we don't want. We want to separate these bodies. So let's go back into Fusion here. Once we're back in here, the first thing that we're going to want to do is deselect one of the bodies. It doesn't matter which one first, but we can deselect this bottom one, leaving just that ring at the very top. Now that I have that body hidden, I can actually do the same exact process. So right-click on this. We're going to click Export. We're going to make sure that step file is saved as the file type, and we're going to do edu2. Now when we hit Export, what ends up happening here is that any hidden bodies are not going to be included with the step file export, and when we bring it into SendCutSend, we're only going to see that outside ring show up. Now this is really important. Coming back in here to Fusion, we can see that I can now hide the other body and show it, and get that same effect where I have now two different step files. If we go back to earlier lessons, I talked about always having new components with your bodies. This is yet another reason where it's really good to have different filing cabinets in which your parts are saved in, so it separates them when you're doing your exports and you're sharing it with the manufacturer. Now that we see that, there is one last way to get to your export. You can also just go up to your main file location, come down, and export is there as well. And this is where you can see all the different file types. So you can get to DXFs here, all the way down to step files. If you show DXF, you can see that this is going to have an error because it is a 3D object. All right, now that we understand the different ways that we can pull those step files out, let's talk about the things that we need to understand on what's going to end up happening when you have a step file. Now, the first thing is that step files have no history. Now, we talked about how there's native file types, that F3D. If I save that and I share it with somebody else that has Fusion, they can see all of that history and timeline come through. So they can edit the extrusions, the sketches, just like I would be able to. However, if I send a step file or I receive a step file, it is a solid object that has no history, and I lose any parametric design capabilities. So if I want to change a chamfer or radius, I've lost that. Now you can go in and essentially sketch and extrude and manipulate that part to be what you need it to be. It's a solid object, but your hands are kind of tied on having it all change in the background automatically. Now, additionally, you can go into Fusion if you have access to that file. You can make your changes and then just re-export that step file. So say with SendCutSend, there's an issue with the part. They're not going to be able to fix that on the step file side. So you're going to have to go into Fusion, create those changes, re-export that to get them what they need. Now, the last thing is that exporting that step file, or really any file, is the handshake to that manufacturer. They're not going to be able to make those changes because they don't have that history. And what you're saying is, this is an acceptable part and I need you to manufacture it, and that's that handshake situation. So know when you give that step file, they're hard to manipulate. It's kind of what we're getting at here. Now that we have a good understanding of how to get those step files out, now we're going to talk about on the other side, once you bring them into SendCutSend, how to manipulate your part to get what you need, whether you're adding features like bending, hardware installation, or powder coating. So we'll see you on the next lesson.